kind of warm up here. Um, so I think it's time for a little bit of an apple pie tonight. Um, yeah, so I had Brian's just coming in here. We're all sitting in the wrong room, and I'm like, why are there no comments in here? And I realized, we're sitting in the wrong room.
I was just thinking everybody had abandoned us. I mean, I knew it was going to be only a matter of time before that happened. So,
All right, let's get our
Yeah.
ducks in a row here.
Yeah.
I'll do this little caption deal. Oh wait, what?
do you know how sometimes when you're in the plane and you have the squelch turned up kind of high and then you start making the wind noises in your mouth? You know you've been flying too long when you're sitting at your desk at work and you're trying to replicate the same thing.
That's part of why I like starting a radio call with kind of a filler word at first, because you figure that's getting cut off at the beginning. So Adam was complaining about audio seems janky. Can anyone else give us a thumbs up, thumbs down before we go, before we start the recording? I guess you'll actually have to type something. We won't be able to see your thumbs up, thumbs down, but. Oh yeah, get to the apple pie.
Audio seems janky.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for someone else to tell us how it is.
What is?
Check 1, 2. Maybe I'm janky.
Let's get a.
Sounds beautiful here.
Audio good here.
Great. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
We can. I can create a 60 cycle hum or something if we need it.
Can you whistle one?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. You ready?
I'm ready. You ready, Ben?
Let's do it.
All right.
No, I'm not ready yet, but yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
No, wait. Okay, I'm ready.
Welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast. What is it like to become a pilot in midlife? The challenges are unique, but so are the rewards. Hosts Ben, Brian, and Ted talk learning to fly, growing as pilots, and the joy of flying to destinations. The purpose of the podcast is not to teach, but to share knowledge and experiences. You definitely should not take any advice too seriously from an aviation podcast that uses terms like icing on the vegetables. Okay, checklists are complete. Let's get the show started.
Hello and welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast, episode 102. My name's Ben. I am a commercially rated pilot with an IFR rating based here in Atlanta, Georgia, the Atlanta metro area. I fly 182, I like to call the Beast. And joining me tonight, as always, is our friends, Brian, a private pilot in Nashville, Tennessee, home of the Bachelorette Super Charlie. He flies a Cherokee 180 we call Lucy. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, and hello, everybody in the chat, and also our good friend Ted. But I'm super excited to be here tonight because I'm hoping I actually learn some things as much as offer some things that I've learned. So flying cheap is a mythology, but we're here to seek it out.
Absolutely. Everybody's looking for a good deal. Also joining us tonight from the left coast, our friend, the sport pilot extraordinaire, Ted, flying a flight design CTLS we like to call the Egg. Good evening, sir.
Hey, yeah, we were talking earlier about it is dreary and dismal and dark here at 2 p.m., which is never a good sign for flying.
Yeah. No. And I'll say a little bit more about that when we go around the horn about our recent flying adventures. But yeah. The time change is really throwing a lot of people off. And it's been very Portland-like weather here in Atlanta the last couple of days too. So dreary, rainy, cloudy. So, but that's, we're entering that season. That's just the way things go.
Yeah. But that's prime time for your instrument flying.
Well, funny you should say that. Want to just let everybody to know tonight we're going to be talking about flying on the cheap or being fiscally responsible. Choose your way to describe it, but that's what tonight's all about, as Brian mentioned. Brian, why don't we'll go ahead and hit the housekeeping, and then we can go round robin on the recent adventures.
All right, yeah, let's knock this out. So, housekeeping. We are grateful for making this the best pilot community that we know of. It's a positive space where we share everything from training experiences, shared personal minimums, tackle ownership challenges, review flight plans, and best of all, make new aviation friends. Ways to connect with us. You can join our Patreon community from $1 a month. That is 25 cents per episode. That is one gumball machine entry per episode. You can access exclusive content in our Discord community. 10% of the proceeds, or actually 10% flatly, actually goes to support the Freedom Aviation Network's anti-human trafficking efforts. You can watch us live on YouTube, which many of you are doing right now, and thank you for that. We're on Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern, and the chats are getting bigger and bigger. It's pretty awesome to see. You can share your stories and musings and insults or whatever you feel like. midlifepilotpodcast@gmail.com. We read every message, and you might even hear yourself on the show. Send us audio, whatever you want. And for everything Midlife Pilot Podcast, community feedback, merch, dad hats, and more, visit midlifepilotpodcast.com.
Very good. Couple of the chats really blowing up tonight because they're saying, I mean, can you be fiscally responsible and fly an airplane? And probably not. But what we're really about tonight is where we can maybe cut costs a little bit. Responsible? No, but at least save a little bit of money. Hey, Ted, we got a couple of new Patreon supporters. You want to give us the what's what on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a couple of Hershey bar level supporters this week. That's Alpha Echo Golf, who I just talked about being in the OB Mafia, and Stephen S. So I want to say thanks and welcome to the new people. Also, some notes from our community of Discord this week, some of the conversations that were going on. Wendell Geek helped me collect some of these. The first was about cleaning our bellies. The plane bellies, actually. The second one was about Curly's no-go decision-making process that ended in a no-go. And so there was a long conversation about that. Pete had talked about his new plane and his trip report coming home, gave a flystow log showing that trip as well. Good debrief. And Chrissy started a thread on the rewards of having passengers. I'm kind of an outlier on that, being a very much an introvert. That I mostly prefer being alone in the plane.
Yeah, some really good stuff going on in the community, and I think on one hand, I totally get it. There's nothing better, and a lot of people talked about this, and everybody agrees. You know, it's like to take somebody up for their first flight is pretty much the greatest thrill that anybody can have, I think, as a pilot. And we have a lot of people in the community, Lissa and some others, that do a lot of public benefit flying to just continue to sustain and extend that feeling as far out as possible. At the same time, Ted, I am fully with you. It does seem like people fall into different camps. And I suppose that's based on introvert, extrovert, or other things, but I love flying by myself. I love flying with other people. I just love it all. But there's definitely a lot of people that are averse to flying by themselves, and it's demotivating for them if they don't have someone to fly with. And while I do understand that, I also think, and I think I even made a video about this once, but there is something so powerful about solitude in the air. And Ben, you always call it air therapy, and I believe that is a thing that you can only get one way, and that is by yourself.
It's an interesting segue to what I did yesterday. I did an angel flight. I flew from our base airport in Kennesaw down to Panama City to pick up a patient and took them to Augusta. The weather, I had done a pretty thorough debrief on the weather. There was a period back in my home base of low IFR that was supposed to clear out by 3:30, 4 o'clock, somewhere in that time frame. And I was planning on getting back around 5 to 5:30. And to your point, I'm like on both sides of the fence. My flight down there, I had a 40 knot headwind, and I loved every second of it. It took 2.5 hours to get down there, but I was in between layers. It was just gorgeous. It was one of those mentally recharging trips. It was just wonderful. The patient was awesome, really cool person. We hit it off. Just a very interesting character. And we had a great chat the entire flight back. Got to shoot an approach, to your point, Brian. A lot of marginal VFR and IFR weather in our area. And it was interesting because I was relating it to in our Discord server, somebody had talked about, there was on another podcast, I learned about flying from that, where their instrument was a little bit off on takeoff, and he lost confidence in that instrument. I was shooting approach to runway 5 into Daniel Field. That's Delta November Lima. And I was in the clouds, and I had my needles squared up. And when we broke out, I was off. I was not lined up with the runway. And this was marginal VFR. I was still about on a 3-mile final, so I had plenty of time to correct. And when I lined it up, I was about a dot, maybe about a half a dot deflection. So it caused me, just put that seed in my brain. Well, that's weird. It was an RNAV approach. It was GPS. I'd never seen anything like that, but it put that seed in my mind. I will say, and I am going to get her to write in to describe the landing that I made with her in there, because no one would believe me if I told you, but we'll save that for another day. Probably my best landing ever. I'm just going to put that out there.
Did you have her notarize a document stating that it was truly a good landing?
She filmed it, and she is certifying that it's not been digitally altered. It's yes.
Yeah. So isn't this person already going through enough, and you're strong arming them for some sort of? I mean, is this ethical?
Listen, I'm not saying, but she mentioned she's probably going to request me for all of her flights.
Great.
Yeah. So anyway, I get out, I refuel, I do another weather debrief. The weather hasn't moved out like I thought it would, and it is low IFR. Ceilings are at 400 feet, and I wait about 10 or 20 minutes. The TAF says it's still supposed to move out. It was going to be about an hour and 15-minute flight, so I decided to go ahead and launch. 2 airports to the north were calling for marginal VFR, so I had my outs. Here's what I didn't plan on. It's the time has changed, and it's getting darker sooner. And I've flown night IFR before. It's not my first time, but I get on to final approach. So first of all, the winds are coming from the east. So the RNAV to runway 9 at McCollum, the base or the minimums are 500 feet. The clouds are at 400 feet. So they are running the ILS to runway 27, landing with a tailwind, because those minimums are 200 feet. So now that's in my brain. First thing in my brain was the GPS route was a little bit off, and I'm flying an ILS now. The second thing is I got to land with a tailwind. Third thing is that these clouds were super thick. When I was in between layers when I got on final, there was still a fair amount of light outside. I could easily see everything inside my cockpit. When I dipped into the clouds, it was like somebody turned a light switch off, and I didn't have my headlamp on. And I'm thinking to myself, for the first time in 1,100 plus hours, what have I gotten myself into? I was a little worried. I could see the airspeed indicator, but I could see what position it was in. I couldn't see the actual mile, so I knew if I was too fast or too slow. Yeah. I was ready for the going mist and diverting to my other airport, but I was like, let's just give this a shot. And I broke out at 400 feet, and I was, I flew the approach very well, but I was starting to question some of my choices that I've made for that flight. And
What's
this
your
is the first
cockpit
time
lighting?
I've ever been in that situation.
What's your cockpit lighting situation?
The cockpit lighting situation is I have to wear a headlamp.
There's actually an oil lamp. It's one of those storm lamps,
Right.
the long wick. Yeah.
That might be just as effective as my headlamp. Open flame inside the cockpit. That'd be great. But yeah, I mean, it was the first time that I was like, this is real. I mean, this is some crazy stuff. So anyway, that was but both, it was nice being by myself on the two legs, and it was also great having somebody. This person was very conversational. She was very easygoing. It was just an enjoyable conversation. And so, like I said, I just enjoy both sides of it. Both the flying with passengers and not flying with passengers.
Well, speaking of flying ILS, Alyssa in the comments is saying, first ILS I flew at MSN Madison. I missed the note on the plate that said the localizer is offset. Freaked me out when I was needle centered, but not on center line. Yeah, that'd be a surprise to come out of the clouds and have the runway offset.
Yeah. As long as you can see it and you've got time to correct, it's really not that big of a deal. But anyway, it was. I mean, I was thinking about that approach all the way up until about lunch today. It's like, what could I have done different? Wear the headlamp. It's just a thing that I wear across my head, and it works great. I didn't think through it. I thought it'd be down on the ground in time.
Yeah.
Do you have a place in your cockpit where you can hang a little, like in Lucy, there's a little metal hook where the hand mic used to go on the sort of side panel. And it actually occurred to me not long ago flying at night that instead of wearing this thing on my head, I can actually just use the strap and fashion it to this little hook, and it actually does just as good of a job lighting up what I need to see, and then I don't
I'll
have this thing
probably
stuck in my
look
head.
into that. The
Yeah.
thing I do like about the headlamp is that the light is wherever you're looking. So if I need to look at some engine gauges that are on the other side of the dash, the light will always be pointing in the direction I need to see in.
You have engine gauges on the other side.
I do.
Mm.
I do. And maybe there's a way to do that. Our friend Barry says in the comments, sounds like Ben needs to update the panel.
Yeah, it's just that easy.
And, it's a great segue into tonight's topic. That's a very cheap and inexpensive opportunity. Said no one ever.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we can set the stage with this, but I just want to say that what we're talking about today as here's the disclaimer: safety first. We are not looking to cut corners or do anything that is a bad idea, but we even have people in the community that go by the name Cheapskate, right? So we have people that have some pretty great ideas on how to make aviation as wallet friendly as possible, all within the idea that this is the dumbest economic thing that you can possibly do with your life. I guess maybe having a boat's worse. I'm not really sure. I've never had a boat, but this seems pretty bad.
You can go faster in an airplane, so it makes slightly more economic sense to have a plane versus having a boat, at least in my point of view.
Yeah. Well, so Ben, why don't you get us started down the road to, saving some money here? Like, Santa Claus can get you a headlamp. Don't worry, Ben.
We have one. It's just we needed to wear it before we get into dark night flying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to tackle some of the instrument and commercial rating ideas that we talked about. And it's a little bit easier for those ratings because you don't need it. You can do a lot of this stuff on your own where you don't have to pay an instructor. Now, don't get me wrong. For the instrument stuff, there's dual instruction time you need for that and the commercial. But to get practice in flying instrument approaches, all you need is a safety pilot, which has to be somebody that is rated for the type of plane you're flying in. So it can be a private pilot, and you can swap on and off and do it for each other, where you're not having to pay an instructor. And that's an incredibly great way to build that experience and nail those things down. Really wish I had somebody last night. If I had another pilot on the plane with me, I think my workload would have been a lot better, and the stress would have been a lot less.
And then you get more benefit out of it, mutually, because you can critique each other or how you do your CRM and all that. By the way, side note, disclaimer, check with your insurance companies and whatever, because they're going to have different requirements for people that are flying in various planes. You can't just put anybody in any plane at any time.
That's true. Thanks for that. So yeah, you can share, do safety pilot for other people, have them do it for you. When you're planning your routes, look at the fuel stops, look at the gas. Everybody has an EFB that will tell them what the fuel is at those locations. You can, if you're part of a club, which we'll get into later, you can split expenses on database updates and, things like that. But there's a lot that you can do. You need X number of hours in different things for both the instrument and the commercial. And you can combine those hours into those ratings. So, you need a 300-mile cross country. Don't quote me on that, but it's a very long one for the commercial, and you need 3 stops. Well, you need a long one for, I think it's 250 for the instrument. So do the commercial one, and you can count them for both. There's ways to combine those hours that you need into one.
Yeah.
So just another thing to think about.
Well, you mentioned fuel, and I think that's Ted's plane flies on I don't know the on imagination and dreams.
Yes.
So
the thought of fuel is all it needs. Yes.
Yeah, there's no ethanol in dreams. So fuel, though, I think, and by the way, just for the listeners, what we're doing, Ben is a IFR rated commercial pilot, as he said. So we want Ben to speak to those things. Ted, I'm a private pilot without an instrument rating yet. And then Ted is a sport pilot. So we have different perspectives and hopefully something for everybody here. I will say, from a fuel standpoint, on one hand, I find it hilarious how fuzzy the math can be for people to justify, I'm going on a flight to go get fuel for 20 cents cheaper per gallon or whatever, because then you're still burning oil, you're still burning, I don't know, you're putting wear and tear on the, I don't know, is this really real? Sometimes people get really fixated on just the fuel price. Let's just leave that as being, of course, get fuel where it's cheaper. Of course, if you can get fuel yourself and pump the fuel yourself, self-serve, do that. Full service, or like more expensive fuel will be more expensive. Less expensive fuel will be less expensive. So we don't have to really
go down. Did you use AI to help you come to that conclusion, or did you come to that on your own?
Do not explode the facade that I have going here of genius.
Okay, sorry.
Just remember, we need to remember that quote for the end of the year saving.
I'm marking it right now.
Yeah.
Cheaper fuel is cheaper. More expensive fuel is more expensive.
You'll pay less for cheaper fuel. Yes. And
I think the case where, it's hard when you're local, getting the cheaper fuel, because what are you doing? You're flying 30 miles to go save the 20 cents on fuel.
Yeah.
Where it really helps, though, is when you're doing a big cross country. And
right. So that's what I wanted to get into. Yeah. Is because it's really about, from a flight planning, looking at, cross country flight planning, and think about inside that all of the ways that you can save money by being more flexible, by planning your route based on fuel prices, but even more importantly, thinking about weather and winds, right? I mean, if it's a 20-knot headwind on Tuesday, but you have the flexibility to do the trip on a Thursday, and there's no headwind, that is massive. It's not going to matter really how cheap the fuel is. So be thinking about those efficiencies in terms of your flight planning. At the same time, never at the expense of safety. Um,
Yes.
don't put yourself over 40 miles of protected marshlands to save money. Spend more money to go around these places of no place to land or to be saved. So again, safety is paramount. But what else do you see, Ted, in terms of like fuel planning? I guess you just throw a bunch of gas cans in your plane or whatever. I don't know what you do.
Yeah, it turns out when you've got 8 to 9 hours of fuel range that you don't think about it quite as often. But it is, I noticed this when Ben and I were flying together, changing your route slightly to go from $7 fuel to $5 fuel, it makes a 2-mile difference. Even though you're changing in the center, you're changing it by 40 miles. It doesn't really matter because you're planning that far in advance for it. And
Mhm.
those are the times where I think it really helps.
Well, on the flip side of that too, I've always said when I do my bigger trips, I tend to stick to deltas at a cost because I see the other end of it potentially where if you end up in a place where there is no services and you need services, then you're going to pay more. Even though on the front end, a
Yes.
delta is going to be more expensive for certain things, you very well could get caught on the other side of that.
That's more on the safety side things, and I think that's a smart way to go. One of the things that I noticed between me and my partner in our plane is I generally fly an economy cruise. I'm lowering the prop. I am, you know, dropping my manifold pressure pretty far down, and I'm pretty aggressive with my leaning. And I've noticed that I regularly get, Ted, don't laugh, don't roll your eyes. I'm getting like 13 to 14 miles to the gallon when I'm flying. And when he's flying, it's usually 6 or 7. He's coming from the airline world. He's used to flying at 500 miles an hour, and he wants that plane to go as fast as he can make it go. And he's running almost full prop, and he's got the throttle almost. He's probably running 85% power to my, or 90% power to my 60% power
Yeah.
setting. So, but that adds up, especially for the 3-4 hour trips that you're taking, if you're going longer. And guess what? I'm trying to build time too, so I'm not in a rush to get anywhere. It's
That's
okay to go, 120 knots as opposed to 135 knots.
Yeah, that is a mindset if you're trying to build time or you've got an extra 10% of your time available, right? Is you're building hours, you're not building miles. And that's a mindset change. But that's also true even for the rest of us that aren't building hours, which is, you know what? I can slow down, I can go back 10% on my power setting, and I'm only losing 5 knots. I'm not making that big of a difference. Even in a day of flying, the difference that I've made is 20 minutes. That's and it's a big savings. Uh, I do like that. On my panel, I've got miles per gallon. We're not talking gallons per hour. I'm talking nautical miles per gallon. And
That's so crazy.
yeah, and so you can use that to really optimize it and pull back and see if you pull back, are you getting to the point that you're behind the curve on that, and so you're actually losing at that point. And it especially makes a difference on headwinds, on where that happy point is. But usually, I'm just not willing to pull it back far enough to get that to the highest number. I just use a roughly a decent number.
Yeah.
It's amazing though, just pulling back, 5% makes a huge difference on that economy.
I find it interesting, the paradox of how hard every one of us works to become trained, certificated, testing, all the things. Just think about the absolute one after the other indignities that we all suffer to try to just get all we want to do is fly somewhere. And then what do? Then we get in the plane and then people start trying to figure out how to minimize time in the air. I am I'm about time having, not time building. Hey man, that's why I love a good go around. That's why I love a good, headwind. I do not care. And that is probably why I should be flying a 120 or a 140 ultimately. But I am just having that mindset will save you money. If you're just not thinking about the it's not like when you're driving a car, we've been doing that our whole life, and it's tiring and it's traffic, and like this is such an incredible thing that we get to do. Just I don't know, yeah, you're only going to save 15 minutes. Oh my gosh, you get to fly for an extra 15 minutes. It's not going to make a difference to anything else.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
Jim at the Flying Midwest podcast, when I was talking about even those of us that aren't building hours, he said even those not building hours and flying for fun, why rush? You're still flying, which is awesome. Which is exactly what you were saying, Brian. It's why. What are you doing that you need that amount of time?
I think it's just a carryover. People just they get in motion, and then I think car behavior starts to take over a little bit without people realizing it. That's my theory. But yeah. So
Yeah.
Ben, what do you got? What's the next one here, Ben?
Are we still on the? I mean, I kind of hit all the ones on the commercial rating. I felt like that was the most interesting, and yet
Let me
the
ask you
least
this.
expensive rating.
Let me ask you one, Ben.
Sure.
There are a host of things you can do making money is saving money. So one of the things I know that some commercial folks can do without it necessarily being a job is like say that you're a commercial pilot, but you are you're renting a plane from a flight school or part of a flying club or something. You could potentially do aerial photos or something to barter. I don't know. There's some way you can, in small doses, offset expense.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like I am an authority on this, and I don't want to. We're not CFIs. We're not. So I don't know that I want to speak to specifically exactly what you can or cannot do. Although you can go get your CFI, and then you're going to be flying other people's planes. I've always said that's my goal when I retire is to fly somebody else's airplane and not incur the cost. So yeah, I mean, there are some things that you can do. Um, to build that time cheaply or get to that point. The commercial rating where I was going with that a minute ago is that it's just a bunch of hour requirement check boxes. I chose Nathan Ballard as my CFI, and I mean, if you choose him, it's gonna in your midlife pilot community, you'll probably get a huge discount. So you're saving money right there. No pressure.
Look, you're just offering.
Yeah.
This has not been sanctioned, but we're positive.
Although he paid a
Sorry,
really nice
Nate.
compliment to me earlier in the chat. But anyway,
If
my
you
point
mention
being
us
is
to him, he actually charges 20% more.
actually that
So
probably
yeah.
is probably true. Be that as it may, my point is they're really there. You've got some dual stuff that you have to do, but it's a fairly limited number of hours. And on top of that, it's learning the maneuvers and having somebody who knows exactly how to execute those maneuvers and teach them to you. Outside of that, you can kind of do a lot of the stuff on your own. So yeah, the commercial rating, it's great to have. It's very inexpensive to come by, and you can again use it to start making money instead of spending it. So,
And Alyssa brings up a great point here, real quick. I mean, obviously, the pro rata share is the way to go when you're going to get $100 hamburger. Split the costs, pro rata. So hopefully, everybody's already taking advantage of that. I find it hard sometimes to do that because I don't know. I want people to just feel like if they're not a pilot, especially, right? Like I just want them to have a good time. But sometimes I get a little, little Venmo, a little something. But I don't know. I find that to be, I don't know. It's like if you were giving somebody a ride in your car, it's like, hey, check it out. I got my driver's license and check out my new car. Let's go to the mall or whatever.
so I had a friend
That'll
have a
be
great
$8.
way to. I hear what you're saying. He says that if I invite you to go on my plane with me, I don't expect you to cover any costs.
Mm,
But if you have a friend that says, "Hey, let's go flying sometime,"
yeah.
then I don't feel so bad asking them to share the cost.
Perfect way to That's a perfect way to put it. Love that.
So,
Yeah.
you guys have some thoughts on maybe some maintenance.
Yeah,
I want to say maintenance hacks, but that sounds really unsafe.
I'm a bit of a
That's our
hack,
next
sure.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We were talking before this about Mike Bush and Savvy Aviation, who
Who's
I'm
Mike Bush?
definitely exactly. I am in the gospel of Mike Bush, and I love his way of doing things and his mindset. One of the things that he talks about is the colleal interpretation, which says, "Oh, you know that list of 22 things that you can do on your plane? It's actually those are examples of things you can do." So if it says you can change the tire, but it doesn't say that you can remove the disc for the disc brakes, that's the same sort of activity. So go ahead, and it's up to you on where you sit on the comfort of both the law on that and your own mechanical abilities. But that is something that I very much like doing. Um, Partly, it's more the introvert thing than it is the cheap thing. Uh, I can just work on my plane and bother no one and just do my thing, and so that's why I like doing it. But it certainly saves a lot of money that way. If all you have to do is pay for your oil and the filter, and you can do an oil change, that's great. Go ahead. On the hand, if you're not comfortable with that, the most expensive thing you could do is an oil change if you don't know how to do it. So I understand a new engine is expensive. So that's probably you know know what your limits are.
Well, and so from the other side of it, somebody who is in a certified aircraft and uses a mechanic.
Hmm.
I mean, I know you use a mechanic, but you have a little bit more flexibility, obviously, in the world that you're coming from, right? Isn't that right, Ted? You can
It's
get a certificate or
you can get a light sport repairman certificate, which
yeah.
I haven't done, which would be that, by the way, that is a cost saving thing. We're not going to go down that path, but that
Okay,
is
all right.
wildly cost saving. But mine is really close to a standard plane. It has one or two things that shares with experimental, but
Mhm.
there are a lot of those. There's even a few areas that it's more strict, but
Yep.
it's roughly the same as your plane.
And I would say generally for most midlife pilots, a lot of us come to aviation from the outside coming in. I would say, I mean, certainly there are people that, this was their life. They grew up in this, they've been around it. But a lot of us are coming outside in. And I think that if that's the case, always default or defer to someone who knows more than you and take the opportunity to take some time to learn those things. If we've only been flying planes for several hundred hours or whatever it is that you've got, there's certain people are going to have different levels of comfort. We're not here to speak to that, but what I can say is one way that I've definitely saved money is by having, this really comes back to networking in the community and creating meaningful relationships with people, not to this end to save money, but that can be a direct consequence. And I think in the case of my primary mechanic, it's one of those situations where he doesn't have to be doing this so much anymore, and he feels so sorry for us and pities us so much that he will not let himself fully just leave it all behind. He knows that if without him we are toast. And but the criminally cheap prices that he charges for most things is, and we always pay him well above and beyond whatever he invoices for. That's how sweet of a relationship it is and how meaningful of a relationship it is. It also invites the ability to do owner assisted annuals, which I know a lot of people have mechanics where they cannot do that, or situations where they cannot. I would say if you can figure that out, you will save so much money because you are helping them, obviously. And then the things that you are learning will also save you a lot of money. So I would say if there's like a single thing to go after that's like kind of the highest yield over the course of a year, maybe in competition with one other thing that we're going to get to, but I would say this is probably one of the highest yield opportunities for people is to, get do owner assisted annuals. And even for I do owner assisted everything I possibly can that he will let me do that our schedules work out for me to do. I want to be around for all of it. I'm trying to absorb as much of that information as possible. And I like knowing what's going on. I learn something crazy, awesome every time. So, all that being said, know your limits. I know that somebody said that in the chat. I think it was Barry. That's very sound. Do not just because you've seen it done once or helped a mechanic doesn't mean that necessarily you're ready to do it on your own. Know your limits. But I would say owner assisted annual is right up there with probably the way that I've saved the most money so far. That and having a relationship built mechanic that I'm kind of working with, and then if it gets to be something that's really kind of intense, where it's like, okay, he probably doesn't want to rebuild this carburetor, or I don't know, whatever, that kind of stuff. If it's more time consuming, but for those little, it's like he can just take the door off and go fix the handle, and put it. He'll take the door back to his house and fix it and bring it back or whatever. All those little things really, really help. So have a good relationship with a mechanic and do owner assisted annual.
Keep in mind too that if you're listening to this and you're saying, "Oh, I don't have these skills. I'm not mechanically inclined." Can you take your cowling off? Hopefully, yes. That's all you need to be able to do for an owner assist. If you can do dumb things like pull the cowlings off, you can be their assistant, and that's a lot cheaper for you to spend your time doing that than for them to be spending their time doing that.
Yeah, if
At
you know how to strip
Yeah,
screws.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I would say I just don't have the desire to
Mhm.
do it on my own. And for those of us who aren't like that, and I know we're going to get into this, and we've talked about it, but having a partner split costs is probably the only reason why I am able to do what I'm able to do from a financial standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, it's being in a partnership with 1, 3, 5, whatever the number is, I think is an extremely effective way in making this hobby affordable for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's great that you can take any maintenance bill and divide it by 2, or, like some of our friends, divide it by 3 or divide it by 4. That
Oh
makes a
yeah.
huge difference.
Yes, those fixed costs when those get divvied out, it really, I mean, it makes the difference for some of us. Certainly for me, if wasn't in a partnership, I don't know what I would do, and I feel so fortunate. Ben, you're fortunate as well. We ended up in these situations with really good planes that have been good to us and have been reasonably maintenance issue free for anything that's abnormal. So we've been very lucky, and when things do come up, to be able to share that burden is massive.
So, and for everybody that hasn't heard this before, we split all operating costs in our partnership, and then when it's time to overhaul the engine or replace it, whatever we decide to do, it's based on pro rata, which to me, again, is the fairest thing in the world. And that's another tip is when you start your aviation journey, if you think there's any chance that you can become an owner of an airplane, I would start recommending putting whatever sum of money you can aside into a bank account, just like we were taught when we were very young, and creating yourself a reserve for when it is time to have a really big expenditure. So part of the partnership of that, it comes into that. So
Well, that's an interesting point that we've got to address as well, which is budgeting, right?
mhm.
Part of this is hacks you can do to save money, like flying to a different airport or doing an owner assist. But there's also how are you structuring your finances? How are you paying into the plane? Things like that. And whenever we're going to do a topic like this, where it's flying on a budget, one name comes to mind. Didn't even ask him. My friend Nate, who goes by Cheapskate, gave us some feedback, which is exactly who you want to hear from when we're talking about.
I love nominative determinism.
Exactly. Yeah. So here we go.
I was excited to hear about the show topic today. As you know, affordable flying is an area of passion for me. I'm just going to leave one point with you that I think is one that's not talked about quite as much. I thought it was kind of interesting that the show topic of today was flying on a budget, which is not exactly the same thing as flying without a lot of money. I think that budgeting is really important. One thing that I've done is I have a separate bank account that I use for all of my flying related expenses. And I have a separate debit card that I use to pay for fuel, and my Venmo account is set up with that account so that I can pay instructors and things like that. And then I have a weekly amount that my wife and I have agreed on that I transfer into that account. And I think for some people that would probably help a lot to make sure they don't spend too much. For me, it's sort of the opposite effect. It's what enables me to spend anything at all. I am a father and a husband, and I consider the money that I earn at my job to be for the entire family. So when I want to, go blow a couple $100 to go flying, there's some guilt associated with that, because the money's for everyone and it really only benefits me. But because my wife and I have already agreed upon a certain amount every week that goes into my flying fund, I don't really have to worry about, oh, am I wasting my kids' money? I already decided to waste their money, I guess. So that decision's behind me, so I just need to decide, hey, is this money worth not flying some other time? The other thing I really like about it is when you can't fly for a while because you're too busy or the weather's bad or the airplane's grounded, you keep accumulating that, and that money starts to burn a hole in your pocket, and then you can go do a bigger trip later or something. So you don't feel quite as bad when you're stuck on the ground since you're saving up. Anyway, this advice isn't for everyone. Some people really hate to know how much they're spending, so they don't want to track it at all. But for me, this has worked out really well and made flying a more positive experience. Anyway, thanks for letting me share this with you, and looking forward to hearing the show.
Yeah, it's always good to hear from Nathan for that.
He's been a long-time supporter. We definitely appreciate his input on that.
Yeah.
And I fall into that second camp. I would love to set up a separate checking account, but I really just don't want to know that information.
Exactly. Yeah, I always say I just load the money cannon and point it toward the plane. I try not to, but I have the luxury that I can do that and not affect my kids' college education, which is an advantage of not having kids or college. So,
well, by the way, nobody's done that better than you think about having your child be your flight instructor. That is the ultimate. I mean, we have people in this community that have really figured out some long game scams.
Yeah, I very much respect our friend Evan. I've got 3 boys, and I couldn't get any of them to get to their CFI before it was time for me to do something. The fact that he was able to get that done is pretty incredible. My hat's off to him.
Yeah, let me cross a couple of comments here that talking about somewhat of the long game, and that's Jim at Flying Midwest that said, I find buying in on a plane who has a CFI and an A&P in the partnership to be very beneficial.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it too. Have the A&P own the plane. They're motivated.
Yes.
Bearded Aviator said their partner is a CFI and A&P, and that works really well. So really appreciate those.
I wanted to hit this one from our friend Eric Grizzly. I think figuring out why you're flying is important. If it's to go to places, that takes different strategies. Is it just to get in the air? Can get much cheaper than soaring. It's a great call out. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, if you just want to go get air therapy and go buy a Cessna 140 or a 120 that burns 4 gallons an hour, and the engine would cost you $10,000 to replace probably. It's a great point. And if you're going to do cross countries, then know that you're going to have to budget more money.
Now,
Get a trampoline.
there's a counterpoint from a bearded aviator here. He said, "My problem has become more time than money now." And then follows up and says, "Let's make an episode on flying on a tight schedule."
Yeah.
And that is true, right? Your issue may not be that the money is the tightest part. Your issue may be that your time is more limited. And if that's the case, great. Fast forward, skip this podcast.
Well, I
No,
think no,
seriously,
we
it's
have a lot
great.
of things that are folding up into that. I think also in the sense of combining flight purposes.
Yes.
So if you're doing your BFR, combine that with something, so you can get to a point where you can have more reasons to make your insurance cheaper. So there's, if you get particular endorsements or particular number of hours or ratings or various things, talk to your insurance provider about where those breaks are. But instead of just flying around what we call recreational gas burning, you can apply purpose to that. And then it does affect, it's kind of like if you don't have a lot of time and or money, then make the most of both of those things by compounding the focus. But I think that's something too that we haven't really talked about, that we'll just wrap up on this real quick, is just to say that insurance is a huge thing. Comparison shop.
Yeah.
Hold people's feet to the fire, check the policies twice, find out how you can make it any kind of better for you. Get if you have your open seat, may not be that big of a deal for you to have, or I don't know, there's various things in the makeup of an insurance policy. We are no experts here, but the insurance people are. Talk to them, figure out where your next breaks are coming, how to make the most of your time to serve your insurance getting cheaper. And then, if you're trying to buy into a partnership to save money on flying, but that plane is a complex, high performance plane and you have 73 hours, probably not the best idea. So you got to look at the whole picture.
Especially if you don't have a complex high performance budget to go along with it.
All of that, but just the insurance implications of various planes and things that you would buy into can be massively different.
Very good.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up, remember, we're not suggesting that anybody get compensated for flight unless you have a commercial certificate and you're flying an appropriate airplane for such. Safety becomes before savings. We're not cutting any corners. Keep good records on this stuff. And, the other one quick thing that I mentioned, it kind of folds into the maintenance and maybe even the insurance side of it, is if you're planning a plane ownership, a lot of times owning an experimental, generally speaking, can be a lot cheaper than owning a certified aircraft. So just some other things to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also a 1970 182 and a 2000 182 are going to go the same speed.
One other thing, we can just throw a couple, a quick grab bag of things.
Yeah.
There's a million free resources for training. There's, we're not talking about training here, but for further ratings or endorsements for the purposes of making yourself a better, safer pilot and also making your insurance cheaper, EAA, FAA, all these resources are there.
AOPA.
Professional association memberships, you'll save money. For flight, if you're a NAF, if you do the NAFI thing or the SAFE program, you can save a bunch of money on for flight. There's just, a lot of people know about a lot of these things and they kind of get around, but we'll try to put as many links to all of this stuff as that we can possibly think of. And there'll be more. Please, in the comments and anywhere that you can,
send us feedback.
Yeah. Tell us more ways, because God knows we need them.
Hey, I've got to catch one that we totally missed here from Fred B in the comments, who said the flying club model is also a great way to fly on a budget, billing on tack time and not the time you're on the ground at your destination. and we have a few CFIs in the club at good rates. We
Absolutely.
didn't even mention that, but the difference of flying a rental on hobs or on tack is huge, and especially if you're flying tack and dry rather than a wet rate, which assumes that you're just firewalling the plane the whole time. So
Yeah.
when
By
you're
the way, we have
being more
tons of.
efficient,
We
yeah,
have a whole episode on flying clubs,
yes,
starting flying clubs, being in flying clubs. Please go back through our library, and we've gone in deep on flying clubs.
yeah. The dude from AOPA was on that one. I remember that. Yeah.
Very good. What else, gentlemen? Anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, I want to make a couple of shout outs here as
Please.
we're kind of wrapping up. First, we mentioned it, kind of implied it early, but there was on the I learned about flying from that podcast, great safety related podcast. Ryan K, one of our supporters, it mentioned that was his podcast segment. It was episode 81 on being in IMC with a failing vacuum pump. So include a link to that, but that's a great podcast to listen to in general. A strange one that I've got to mention because I thought it was hilarious. There's a professional podcast called 21.5. They did an episode that caught my eye because it was called Light Sport Training for the Pilot Track. Again, that was actually about saving money. The quote that I wrote down from that, whatever happened to the Skycatcher? I wonder why it didn't catch on. I'm not going to go down that path, but that just cracked me up. So yeah, we're going to include links to those. Also, Plane Places, which is Virgil, had a great video showing what it's like getting carb ice when you're in cruise. So this is at open throttle and getting carb ice, and he did a great job of showing that and his experience with it. So we talk safety for a reason, and being able to see that and know what that experience is actually like is an eye opener. And I had questions about it. I had to ask him about
And
it.
even more harrowing, I have a new video that I put out where my buddy Luke changed his headsets 92 times.
Yeah,
I saw that one.
Yeah, that was your video about the episode 100 fly-in. It's called Headset Problems and Hot Dogs. And yeah, he tries about 7 headsets.
And Ted, you've just got your video out today.
I did. It actually starts with headset issues, which is kind of funny. And I called that The Journey is Half the Adventure. It was just about getting to West Virginia for that episode because it was all the laughing in the plane is basically what the video's about.
I think I need to go watch that when this is over. I haven't seen that one yet. Of course, I've been kind of busy with work. Speaking of which, next week we'll be talking about juggling work life and feeding your aviation passion. Kind of what Crazy Mike, Bearded Aviator, was talking about, managing your time. So we can probably touch on that a little bit next week. A couple of other things. I want to thank everybody from the audio portion, the people who listen to this audio only. We're getting a lot of support from you guys. Please feel free to leave us a review. A 5-star review would be great. Know that it's very flattering to have the numbers that we do, and everybody that's joining on Patreon. Also know that we really appreciate your support, man. It does really help us. Keeps us sane, keeps Brian on the rails, which is not an easy thing to do.
There's no rails.
No rails. And yeah, that's it. Anything else, gentlemen?
Yeah, real quick. Howard's in here. Yes, thanks for supporting Freedom Aviation Network. We are happy to support the Freedom Aviation Network, and everybody should go to freedomaviationnetwork.org and learn more about their organization and sign up, volunteer, and we are always thrilled. The more that our Patreon grows, the more our monthly dispatch to them grows, and the more people that are in really bad situations can be helped by fellow pilots. It's a great thing. And so thanks for being in here, Howard. And yeah, just Freedom Aviation Network.
That's awesome. Well, that'll wrap it up for episode 102 of the Midwest Flying podcast.
Oh my God.
Hey, Jim.
Which podcast are we on?
This is.
I just saw his name pop through, and it just entered into this brain and just came out of my mouth.
But no, but they're flying Midwest. We are
the Midlife Pilot Podcast, aren't we?
Yeah.
So
Thank you for tuning in to Opposing Basis, episode 358.
Hey, so Ben, what hat are you wearing right now?
This is actually a rafting hat.
Oh, okay. And then what shirt are you wearing?
Oh, Midlife Pilot Podcast.
So if you forget what
That's
podcast
why I
you're
wore
on,
it, because I knew I was gonna
you can just
mess
read
up and
that.
remind me.
Yes.
All right.
Opposing
That was
bases
my
in the
bad.
chat, so we can't claim that we're opposing bases. They're in the chat.
Yeah,
Uh-oh. Yeah.
we can claim it. It's not going to get us very far.
Yeah.
Everybody, thanks for joining us in the chat. We've had a great group tonight. It's been a lot of fun. And again, to all our supporters, we really appreciate you. Signing off, episode 102 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast. Good night, everybody.